in Wisconsin, and obviously a state court doesn't necessarily deal with doesn't deal with U.S. constitutional issues, but but the import of our courts completely understated, I think, by far too many on the left. We're starting to see people discuss it now in the context of some of the proposals that Bernie and Elizabeth Warren are proposing, insofar as you think the courts are going to let you do that? Now, that's a battle that I think we should have and make it more explicit, but it's a real shame that it's going to take another 15, 20 years before people go through the process of realizing how important the courts are and then actually starting acting upon it. Maybe AOC will be able to implement those policies that Sanders proposes in 2021, 10 years later, after she adds 2 more people to the court. But we'll see. But last night, there was elections across the country. Well, not across the country, but I guess sort of spanning the country. There was an important one in Pennsylvania. There was obviously some important local races in Chicago. And there was a hugely important one in Wisconsin. Last April, 2018, there was a statewide race for the state Supreme Court where, and I don't know if they actually register as partisan, Democrat or Republican, but the Democrats supported one candidate, Republicans supported another. Democrats crushed them. And I think if you'll recall, that's when Scott Walker said, ring the alarm bells. There's a real problem here. We're going to have a real problem in the midterms in 2018. And he was right. There was a huge win for Democrats in the fall. Now, of course, Wisconsin is famous for having where Democrats can win 54% of the vote and only get 36% or literally 36 seats out of 100 in the state Senate. The problem is redistricting and gerrymandering. And really the only way to deal with that, now that the Supreme Court has all but said, yeah, we don't care. And not only have they said they're on the verge of saying we don't care, they're also on the verge of saying, and these independent commissions that you set up, these nonpartisan, this vehicle you have to make sure that they're somewhat fair so that you don't have a situation where 54% of the people vote for a specific party and only 36 out of 100 of their representatives win. Those independent commissions, those may not be constitutional either, because the role, the authority to draw these districts is given specifically to the state legislatures, and they cannot outsource that even to an independent commission. So winning the Supreme Court in Wisconsin, in a state specifically, not just like Wisconsin, but specifically Wisconsin, is huge. Because once you own the state legislature, you also then can start to disenfranchise a lot of voters. This is the way it works. And that's what they've done. 1 million people voted last night. 1.1, actually. Million people. More, 1.2 million, I think. And the Democratic-backed candidate trails the Republican-backed candidate by more than 5,000 votes. So you're going to see a recount, but 5,000 votes, hard to imagine where that's going to be made up. Unclear if it's going to head to a runoff or a recount. But apparently there just was not the kind of turnout from the Milwaukee area that we hope. Now, I don't know if that's a failure of not enough money being poured into that race, whether it's an institutional failure, the institutions and the big money don't appreciate the importance of this, or frankly, your average voter, 7/8 of your 1/8 of your average voter just does not appreciate the importance of this stuff. This was a Democratic leaning, a liberal, however you want to describe it, a liberal vote on the court. She had to step down because she has cancer. So this is now the Democrats, the liberals, however you want to call it, they were, I think it's like 4-3, and now it's going to be 5-2. So the idea was they wanted it 4-3, and then they wanted the presidential election where voters come out in a lot bigger numbers to carry the day and then take the state Supreme Court. Milwaukee County not performing as well for the liberal side as it did in 2018. 2018, the liberal candidate won by 41,000 votes, 31.5 points. This time, 97 precincts in, margin is 30,000 votes and 24 points. So you just have 10, 11, 12,000 people. Again, if that number sounds familiar to you when it comes to Wisconsin, it should. Because that's 2016. Just sitting it out. And I get the argument you need to have better candidates, but I'm sorry. Out of that 1.2 million people who voted, if there are 10,000 people in there who can articulate the difference between a left-leaning judge and a right-leaning judge in any sophisticated way in terms of the state Supreme Court, and I would include myself as being not part of that percentage that could, then I'd be shocked. This is basically, broadly speaking, because people don't have the time to dig into the intricacies of state law and determine the voting patterns or the decisions and read the decisions of potential state Supreme Court candidates. This is good guy, bad guy. This is not a persuasion situation. It is a mobilization. And part of that mobilization has to be to make people understand the stakes of a state Supreme Court and of a federal Supreme Court.
Well, it's kind of a catch-22, right? Because I want everyone to vote for progressives in every election, and progressives can't do anything if they're not in office. I also understand that a lot of people have heard it all before and they don't make a connection with how this is going to help their lives. So it's a little column A, a little column B.
The problem is, these people will come out to vote in 2020, but it's going to be too late in 2020 to save the state Supreme Court. I don't know who's in charge of making people understand the relevance of the state Supreme Court. It's a failure of our civics. It's a failure of our education. It's a failure of left-leaning groups, frankly, to articulate the importance of these seats to the voters. And, it's there. I don't even think they're affiliated with the party per se, and I don't think you can be partisan to sit on there. But certainly the Democratic Party had a vested interest in getting people out to vote. It's just they've got to figure it out. They've got to figure it out. Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, in a suburban seat, and this I think is indicative of, when we talk about the surge in voting, right, that we saw in 2018. We talk about the resistance, as it were. I know that's a bad word and it's associated with bad people, but whatever you want to call it, a Navy veteran who served in George W. Bush's Department of Veteran Affairs won a special election to fill a state Senate seat in suburban Pittsburgh. This is a district President Trump won in 2016. Pam Iovino will represent the state Senate district that covers parts of Allegheny and Washington counties after she beat out D. Raja, a businessman who chairs the Allegheny County Republican Party. He took 51% of the vote in that suburban district. The fact is that white suburban women, many respects, are driving a lot of the pickups that we saw in 20. I mean, we talked about that leading up to the election. There's a lot of data to support that, but this is more. Here it is. This is Democrats flip this Pennsylvania Senate district. SD 37 was last up in 2016 when then Senator Guy Reschenthaler won by 22%, as Trump carried it by 6%. That is a big flip. Big flip. So earlier this year, though, Republicans won a Democratic-held seats in Minnesota, Connecticut, and Kentucky. So this is the first seat of the year flipped from Republican control to Democratic hands. So there's been some demobilization in specific areas of the Democratic coalition. And so people got to get to work. Still going on in the suburbs, apparently, though, which is interesting.
Well, can I offer a potential counterpoint? Not necessarily a counterpoint, but something that we need to worry about. It might be slightly out of keeping with the blame the electorate theme.
Whoa, what is that?
So, and I do think of Malaika Jabali's stuff on. Probably nobody knows more about African American voters in Milwaukee than her, right? And so, sure, all of the things you said are true. People in general need to know about the importance of these races. I'm also curious about how did races get scheduled like this time-wise to begin with? Like an obscure off-election in April is obviously not favorable.
1.2 million people. Yes, I'm
That's
sure.
true. That's true. But I mean, it should. But regardless, it should.
Well, she had cancer.
It should. Right. Okay. Fair enough. That's true. But it should always be a pivot point to talk about universal registration and things like that, which I know you agree with. But I think a difference though in mobilization between people in the suburbs and people in a place like Milwaukee is that if you are in the suburbs, you can, and you're very comfortable financially, your politics can be an expression primarily of just cultural disgust with a certain party, as contrasted with a group of people that have felt correctly that a party has steadily not delivered for them. Now, again, I'm not mitigating the importance of the vote, so I don't want to get down that rabbit hole, but I do think it does attest to some bigger problems and structural challenges they need to take on.
How do you account for the drop-off between 2018 and now?
Well, how do you account for the drop-off between 2012 and 2016?
Oh, I mean, I think that explanation goes well. I think there was a sense that, and I think there was. I mean, I think there's multiple things. I think people.
There's multiple.
People thought it wasn't that important.
Yeah,
people thought that
what
the maybe the differences weren't so dramatic, and maybe some people thought Trump was going to lose. But when you talk about the difference of like 6 or 7 months, to me, it just resonates that they just don't see the importance of the state Supreme Court. And so I think there has to be an attempt to educate people to the importance of such things.